I'm very concerned about our country. I think there is a lot of rage. There's a lot of self-righteousness, and those things can be pretty damaging to the soul of other people and of ourselves. I'm always praying that God would make my anger holy, because I think anger can be a good thing. Jesus flipped some tables in the temple. I want to be flipping tables in the right place. I also know that Jesus wept over Jerusalem, and I want to have the tenderness and the holy anger. I also know that the fruit of the Spirit are, the love, kindness, goodness, gentleness. That those are the things that we know God is like, and I'm always praying those that they would reside in me. Help me, Lord.
Hi, this is Frank Schaeffer, and you are watching and or listening to my podcast, In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, which is a live event on Facebook, but also then becomes a podcast and on YouTube and all those other places you can see things like this or listen to them. My guest today is an old friend, Shane Claiborne, who is an author of a lot of different things, including Common Prayer, A Liturgy for Ordinary Radicals, and Red Letter Revolution, What If Jesus Really Meant What He Said, with Tony Campolo. Shane, so that we could go all sorts of places, but let me just start with something kind of
personal, man.
Yeah, good to see you too. Personal to both of us. I haven't seen you in the flesh for a while, and we do so many Zoom things these days. It's like, when was the last time I actually saw somebody I'm talking to? And when did I talk to him on Zoom? Because I don't know whether it was Red Letter Christians last time I saw you or where it might have been, but I never feel like we've been completely out of touch anyway.
Yeah.
Hey, let me bring you up to speed on one thing. Tony and Peggy Campolo and you and I go way back in the sense that you knew them way before we had ever met in person. And I knew Tony from the time I was a teenager. And Peggy is a very dear friend of mine and also of Jeannie's. They have been to my home to visit us here. So before we get into anything about you and an interview of you, let's talk about them for a while, because I saw you wrote a book with Tony, but of course, Tony introduced us because he got me to come to Red Letter Christians and was my introduction to you personally, although of course I knew who you were. Tony is someone who I sort of, different people have different talents. And of course, Tony's multifaceted, but I don't think I've met someone in my life that had a greater skill than Tony and Peggy together as a couple did for building other people up and being not just kind, but leaving you feel more than when you met them. I mean, he was effusively kind. Peggy was too. They always left me feeling that somehow, I had done more than I've really done, or that there was more possibilities. I've never met anybody who builds you up more than Tony Campolo and Peggy. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I think that's a gift, isn't it? I think Bart said Tony feels big and remembers big, but yeah. you just feel that. Yeah. And so, of course, it's been a hard year since his stroke, but I get to talk to him about it every week, and it seems like he's doing good, and they're I mean, the COVID was even more difficult. They couldn't even see each other right after the stroke, and so Peggy would sit outside of his window, and they're like, it's just I can't say how much they've meant to me, for so many years, and so yeah, love them.
Yeah, and Peggy is just absolutely phenomenal. Kind of like my parents, Francis and Edith Schaeffer's relationship. People who didn't really know them very well thought Francis Schaeffer sort of, was the thing. And my mom, of course, was a well-known author and so on. But if you were on the inside track, everything he did was part of her vision. And without her vision of what her husband was doing, in case of my mom, I don't think Dad would have gotten anything done at all. And I don't just mean she was supportive. I mean, she came up with everything. And when I think about the way Tony kind of followed his wife when it came to gay marriage and other issues where she was way out. I mean, not like a few minutes ahead of him, but 20 years ahead of him on so many progressive issues. Do I have that right?
Yeah, well, I can remember them debating. They had this conversation publicly where they would talk through the Bible and their convictions. And I mean, I can remember Tony saying something to the effect of, you know, I think I'm right in my head, but Peggy's right in her heart. And if you have to choose between being right in your head and being right in your heart, go with the heart. So yeah, I love it.
I remember being down at a church in Arkansas where she was given an award, or she gave an award. And I can't remember whether Brian McLaren was there to receive the Peggy Campolo Award, or we were there to give Peggy something, but I was invited down to participate in that. There were so many things Peggy did that just kind of surprise you. You know, you walk into this congregation and it was a progressive, a very accepting and welcoming congregation. The pastor and the people, you know, very attuned to the needs of the gay community at that point, you know, before it was sort of the issue that everybody accepted. Who's their patron saint? Who's encouraged them from the beginning, you know, 20 years in? Oh, Peggy. And, you know, you could talk to her for 5 years and she didn't ever sort of tell you all these incredible connections she had across the country of people that she had lifted up. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I see it everywhere I go. You know, I think the way that she's loved and affirmed and championed so many people all over the country. And yeah, I've got a lot of Campolo lines, but I have a fair amount of Peggy Campolo lines as well, you know, as Tony's.
Yeah. So anyway, we've been there. We talked about that. So let me talk to you a little bit here. Let's just work back in time a little to when I first met you at Red Letter Christians and the things you were doing. And I kind of have a question for you in view of all that. But before we do that, I'd like to have you talk about yourself personally, in the sense that, as you know, my background in the evangelical world is one of a sort of a journey, either of decline, depending on your point of view, into apostasy, or growth. And now all of a sudden I'm smarter because I'm more progressive. I'll leave that to other people to decide. But you know, something I don't know about you is much about your own childhood and who your parents were. You know, are you running from them, running toward them, affirming what they did? Have you gone in a different direction with some of your progressive ideas? Can you get into that a little bit? In other words, just tell me about your background.
What a fun place to start, especially given your own story and history. Yeah, I am. So I'm from Tennessee. I mean, my ancestors they're buried in the hills in Cades Cove, and my great grandfather delivered the mail by horseback, you know. And so I can remember when Dolly Parton won the Kennedy Award, my uncle was sitting on the couch and goes, "I remember when she used to play on the porch," you know. So that's my people. My dad died when I was about 9 years old. It was right before my birthday, actually. He had multiple sclerosis. So, and they didn't know a lot about it back then. So all my memories of my dad were drinking Coke floats in his hospital bed, or he was in a wheelchair. So I would play, we had some great pinball machines. I still have one of them, Frank, but I would play pinball on his lap in his wheelchair, you know, and he died when he was really young, and when I was really young. So those are my memories. But my mom we've been a team, just inseparable. I'm the definition of a mama's boy, and I'm not ashamed of it. I'm an only child, only grandchild on both sides. So my mom really wanted me to go to church, you know, and after my dad died, even my mom went through a divorce. I had a stepdad for a while, and she was sort of, especially back then, kind of ostracized in some ways from, you know, as a single mom and things. But we just hung together. We found a really lovely Methodist church that I grew up in, and fell in love with Jesus. Went to the altar, you know, got born again. Sometimes I joke that we went to that same retreat every year and got born again, you know.
Sure.
But I loved, you know, I was just totally on fire for God. I did some of the wacky stuff, you know, organizing the See You at the Pole campaign, and you know, put prayer back in the public schools, and but I was always had that fire in my bones. And then I did start to see some of the contradictions that are so clear to you, and I think so many people these days. I saw those contradictions in myself too. For instance, we talked a lot about being pro-life, but we really only thought so narrowly just about abortion. And I think I would have been more accurate to say I was pro-birth or anti-abortion, because on so many other issues of life, we were not always the champions and sometimes the obstacles. So it's kind of building a bigger, more robust, expansive, comprehensive ethic of life. That's what I've really been up to. So I went to Philly. Partly because I wanted to get out of the nest a little bit. I wanted to get out of East Tennessee, and man, I think that's really where I began to see some of my blind spots. I began to see things.
How old were you when you went to Philadelphia?
So I was I went to college at Eastern University. I would have been 18 years old, 17 years old, coming out of high school. And man, I can remember feeling like a fish out of water. I was like, are there any other Southern people here? And I put my yearbook from my high school on the shelf, and it had the Confederate flag on it and in it. And we were the Maryville High School Rebels, right? And I can remember a bunch of my college friends being like, yo, what's up with that? Like, that's not cool. It's not about football spirit, right? And I really began to step back. And I also was deeply drawn to this, right? So I wanted to study racial justice and get involved.
What were you actually studying sort of in a formal sense at Eastern? What were you?
I guess I was feeling some sort of call to ministry. So I was figuring it out. I decided to major in youth ministry because you get to have a lot of fun. And but then that's where I met Tony, right? So I began to really vibe with how Karl Barth said, we need to read the Bible in one hand, but we need to read the newspaper in the other, so that our faith is not just a ticket into heaven and an excuse to ignore the world that we live in, but our faith should fuel us to care about injustice and to imagine God's dream on earth as it is in heaven. So I started taking classes with Tony, and that's, boom, there it was. So I double majored in youth ministry and sociology.
But now, was Tony's sociology at that point because I'm very bad on dates, but where was he at in his thinking when you first encountered him? Because of course he's been on a journey too. So where was he at? What was he talking about that you were hearing a different message from him than maybe you had heard before? What was his thing at that point?
The fire in his bones that he's always held together are this sort of evangelical love for people knowing Jesus, along with this love for justice and interrupting injustice. And I can remember, of course, Tony had so many great lines, but he used to, and still says, that in the final judgment we'll all be gathered before God, and we're going to be asked a few questions according to Jesus in Matthew 25. And it's not just going to be doctrinal questions, virgin birth, agree, disagree, or strongly disagree, but we're going to be asked, did you visit me when I was in prison? Did you welcome me when I was homeless or an immigrant? Like, did you care for me when I needed health care? Did you, feed me when I was hungry? So, I think that is what he's always held together, this sort of faith and works, or, Jesus and justice.
Were you kind of impacted? Is his impact on you, was it sort of sudden, or did it come by degrees? Or at first it was just another guy you're listening to, or right away it was like, okay, he's going to have a big influence on me? How was that?
Well, I loved the fire, and we had classes where Tony would, someone would ask, like, is this going to be on the exam? And that was the worst question, So Tony, he just lost at one class, and he's like, listen, everything that I say from here on out will not be on the exam. If you are taking this class for the exam, you are free to go. And we'll take a break. He said, if you have a thirst for knowledge, then you can stay. And he taught till like 11:30 at night, like 4 hours or something, And so, that was contagious, of course, and then, in my sophomore year, we had the Church Takeover, which was instrumental for, folks that don't know about the little community I've been a part of for 20 years, the simple way. It started with homeless mothers and children that were living in an abandoned Catholic church building. And we got involved in that, and it ignited the student solidarity movement. But this is what I remember, Frank, is I remember telling Tony, Tony invited us to come talk about it to his class, which was significant. This is a school of 1,000 people, and 10% of them are in Tony's class. There's 120 or some students there. So we got to go kind of make our case, like, we need to be, we need you down there. We might go to jail, and Tony came in. So he brings us in, lets us give our spiel. And then total like characteristic style, he begins to push us like, have you thought about the other side of this? Have you even contacted the archdiocese? Maybe they have a different, maybe they're concerned about kids being abused or something happening in the church that they're liable for. Maybe it's not just as cut and dry as like, they don't care about homeless people or something, right? So he started playing the devil's advocate, which was awesome because we're in front of 100 people, but I love it because all of that sharpened me, and he started to, he would individually assign our papers, Frank, where I had a paper, it was around the classics. Tony wrote a great book called Partly Right, which was looking at the opponents of Christianity, but also recognizing that they may have been partly right on some things. And so I had to write a paper analyzing homelessness in Philadelphia. And I had to write the paper as if I was Friedrich Nietzsche. That was my paper. So 20 pages on
good
that.
assignment.
Yeah.
Have you ever reread that in the last 20 years?
I might blush. Yeah, but
it's scary to go back to that far. Did you run into Peggy at that point, or was that a later introduction? Because Tony's your teacher at this point, not necessarily a friend and confidant. Because at some point he becomes your mentor, really, in terms of Red Letter and all these other things. Was Peggy in the picture for you then, or was it just you hadn't met her?
Pretty early on. I knew the magic of Peggy Campolo, and so I began to really get to know her. And I mean, I can remember some of her earliest interactions with my mom, because I had this real, sometimes my mom would come at a speaking event that Tony and I would be at, and Peggy would be there as well. Sometimes she was speaking, sometimes she wasn't. But so, yeah, I mean, we kind of became family pretty early on.
Let me ask you a question about your family right now. Tell me, I know you've been living in the back of some sort of tiny house on a truck, or maybe you built it on top of a 1966 VW Beetle. I don't know what you've done. You're always doing something out there. Interesting. So forget the house for a minute. Tell me about your family. I mean, as they are now, who's what age, where is everybody, what's going on?
Totally. So I'm still really, really close with my mom, and she's married to this wonderful guy, has been for 20 years, Steve, my stepdad, and he's got two boys that are they're my awesome stepbrothers, and sister-in-laws now that I've got, and nephews and nephew and niece that I have on that side. And mom and I are as close as ever. We drove our Schoolie is the name of it, Frank, is a school bus turned into a tiny house. My wife is responsible for all this. So we parked it in Tennessee for the summer.
And when you say your wife is responsible for it, just before we go on to, breeze past that too quickly, tell me when you met your wife, tell me who she is.
Okay. So Katie Jo, the double Southern name, of course, is from North Carolina. That's where I am right now. And she's awesome. She came up to Philly, lived in community, did a lot of organizing work, and we met through all of that.
And Katie's out of a religious background, or did she convert, or how did she come to all this?
Well, Frank, she came to the Sweet Lord at a Billy Graham crusade.
Oh, wow. Yeah, classic model here. We should write that down. When was that? How old was she when that happened?
Man, I need her here. I don't know. I don't know if I know exactly the year, but was it during her youthful formative years? I think she was either in junior high or high school, and became a part of, I think it was a Foursquare church. Was she
sort of reconverting, as in she had been raised in a Christian thing, but now, we're going to make sure? No, this was totally an actual conversion.
No, man, she doesn't get any of my Christian jokes when I'm talking about DC talk or whatever. I'm busting out an old school 80s Christian,
She wasn't flushing the toilet and checking to see if the water had turned to blood yet, if Jesus was on his way. None of that kind of.
Yeah, So she didn't grow up in that, but so yeah, we met each other in Philly. In fact, we got married in the old the abandoned cathedral, St. Edward's, which is still mostly abandoned. And Tony and Peggy were there. Bart did a little toast.
What year might have that been when you got married?
we've been married right at 10 years. So 2011. Yeah.
Okay.
This will be, yeah. 11
And then, okay. So continued. Now you're married. And then
yeah. So we parked the bus. We were in Tennessee this last summer. And what was really incredible was, a bunch of our Philadelphia family being in Tennessee with my biological family. And so we got, our friends in recovery from drug addiction and stuff have been down and hung out, played on the lake. We had a bunch of the kids that we've known since they were born that came down, and I beat them to death on the inner tube behind the boat, and that's what I love is when.
Let me just get into one thing with Katie. Where were you in your whole intentional community in Philly, and you moved into a sort of a rundown section of town and you were doing all that? Tell me, first of all, what that was, but what point in your relationship with Katie was that? And did you drag, did you have kids? Did you drag people kicking and screaming into this with you? Or was it all like intentional in the sense that everybody was on board too? Or how'd that all work? Just talk about family and that kind of what you were doing.
We're getting into it now. We're getting into it, Frank. So here's the deal. When I had known Katie for a while, and but it had been a few years since I'd seen her. And when I kind of reconnected with her, I had taken a temporary vow of celibacy. And I love
that. But wait a minute. I want everybody to write that down. A temporary vow of celibacy. That's a good phrase.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know if you meant to be funny, but that's a funny phrase. I took a temporary vow. When you took your temporary vow, did you take a temporary vow of celibacy, or did you take a vow of celibacy that became temporary?
Yeah, that's what it was. So I had
a lot of Roman Catholic priests have done that too,
Yeah, I know that's
took a temporary vow.
Yeah, but so I was being mentored by a monk in Philadelphia who's just showed me so much of the depth of our faith, and I was considering, a life of chastity and celibacy.
Did you ever consider becoming a monk yourself, as in convert to the Roman Catholic Church? How close?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And of course, I've skipped a lot of the chapters just because I feel like you and plenty of other people know about it. Like, I spent time in India with Mother Teresa. So I began to really lean into the Catholic world a little bit and was finding a real depth there. That was a little different from some of my other experience. And so anyway, that was an awkward time to reconnect with Katie. So what we resolved to do was just to write letters for that first year. And we did. And honestly, that was a part of, I guess, my discernment, you would say, but it was cool, like handwriting letters back and forth. And I think the only time I maybe saw her that year was when my house burnt down. We had a terrible fire that burnt down a lot of our neighborhood. And she brought me some, t-shirts, white.
Have you still got the letters, by the way? Did you guys keep each other's letters?
Well, I think a lot of mine burnt in the fire, but she's got them. And I've got a file of what
interject into that, because we don't want to drop a name and not check it out. Just follow the Mother Teresa rift out a minute in terms of that journey towards Catholicism and celibacy. What was her influence, if any? Was it the monk you were influenced by? Just parse that out a little bit.
Yeah. So when I was moving beyond belief only Christianity, this kind of core doctrinal beliefs.
Check the boxes.
Yeah. Thinking of it more of a lifestyle, and thinking of like the things that Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount and the gospel: sell what you have and give it to the poor, love your enemies. These things, live like the lilies and the sparrows. I'm kind of going, all right, who really does that? And there's all these wonderful saints through the centuries, but who's doing it now? And Mother Teresa was one of those who I thought, man, she's given the gospel a pretty good shot. She's taking this pretty seriously. So we wrote her a letter, didn't hear back. I didn't know much about Catholicism, so I literally opened up the phone book. For people that don't know, we used to have phone books that had, anyway. So
we used to have phones.
Yeah. Well,
not cameras that also you can talk on.
This is where that's going, right? So I literally started calling nuns, Catholic orders, and trying to get a number for India for Mother Teresa. And I finally, some of them thought I was a prank caller and hung up, but I finally get this one nun in the Bronx, and she gives me a number for India. and Mother Teresa picks up the phone, and I was calling from a payphone in our dorm lounge because we didn't have cell phones, So and Mother Teresa picked up the phone, and I was expecting, a polite receptionist or something. Missionaries of Charity, how can we help you? And Mother Teresa just, hello. It's very characteristic. Now that I've been out there, it doesn't surprise me at all. But and I said, listen, we're trying to figure out how to follow Jesus, and we want to come to India. We got the summer off. Can we come? And she said, yeah, just come on out. And so that was massive. I mean, things that I had read about Mother Teresa, the home for the destitute and dying, where she lifted people off the streets of Calcutta. But that's where I worked every afternoon. I spent time in the orphanages. And that's where I began to understand that people called Mother Teresa not because of this like saintly halo or something, but because she was their mom. I met these, 25-year-old kids that she rescued them abandoned in a train station and had raised them, And so
what was your job while you were there? Like, what sort of practical things were you doing besides being around her?
Well, I worked in the orphanage in the morning, and I worked in the home, got the home for the dying in the afternoon.
And what'd you do in both of those places?
A lot of different things. So they're just kind of like full on, So we were trying to teach one young guy sign language because we discovered he was deaf, and no one had really kind of diagnosed that. He was really young. And so I know a little bit of sign language. So we were trying to do some stuff like that. A lot of it was just basic grunt work. We were there to work. So we were washing dishes. I was cleaning clothes. But then the home for the dying, the longer you were there, you begin to develop these relationships and kind of be entrusted with a little bit more. There were volunteers that were there for 2 or 3 days or a week, and we were there for maybe 10 weeks. There were other volunteers that were there for 10 years, So, we just tried to help out where we could. And I mean, it was holy work, accompanying people into their death. I can remember one of my friends saying, it kind of feels like we're travel agents, helping people transition from this world to the next.
Let me ask you a question. While you were there, I don't know anything about Mother Teresa compared to you. I've read some things, but it seemed to me that she did not use her position as a helper to also proselytize, unless you count doing the work of Jesus as proselytizing, in the sense that she wasn't telling people, if you die a Hindu, you're going to burn in hell forever. Here's how you accept Jesus. Did that pass on to you? Because you're from an evangelical background that was still checking boxes in part of your head. Is my summary of that true? Did you find something else? And if so, how did that fit with your former evangelicalism? If here we've got an opportunity to share the gospel and all we're doing is taking care of them, we're not actually saving them. Did that even occur to you, or am I totally wrong on this? Or how'd that all fit together?
Well, it's interesting. One of Mother Teresa's, famous lines was, "Our best sermon is our life." And she lived that sermon pretty well. So, the old Francis adage that we preach the gospel always, and when necessary, use words. Those things really began to vibe with me because I had seen a whole lot of words, but very little action, And that was also Mother Teresa's whole, she used to say, it can be very fashionable to talk about the poor, but not as fashionable to talk to them. And this is also about relationship and proximity, and not just caring for justice in some abstract, unrelational sense, But when it came to the sharing of that faith, I mean, it was so personal for her too, that this is where it became really funny, because my evangelical friends would be kind of like their heads spinning. Why are you working with Mother Teresa? And I heard them say things like, Catholics don't believe in a personal relationship with Jesus.
Well, I was raised to believe Catholics were like Hindus or Muslims. They weren't Christians. They believed in Mary, and they did all this other mumbo jumbo, and we had to still share the gospel with them. It was even worse because they thought they were Christians. That's how I was raised.
Well, I always said back, to my evangelical friends, do you know that Mother Teresa calls Jesus her spouse? She called Jesus her lover, right? It doesn't get much more personal than that. This reporter was asking Mother Teresa about, have you ever wanted to be married? Are you married? And she said, "Oh, I am so in love, and my spouse can be so demanding sometimes." She's talking about Jesus. So, but this is what I learned, is that I learned a depth about prayer when I was in India too, because this was really hard work. I mean, it was taxing, in every way, spiritually. And so there was so much that was embedded in prayer. And literally, like, we got up to prayer, we went to bed to prayer, like you interrupted the day for prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And I began to realize that I had become shaped by a really shallow version of prayer that was, like prayer requests in youth group, where you just kind of make all these requests to God.
We
like
just this and just that.
Yeah. Like
we just this and just that. Evangelicals use the word just the way kids started using the word like, rarely in the context in which it meant what it does in the dictionary. Like, hey man, like I'm talking to, anyway.
Yeah. So, I mean, in India, the prayers that we prayed were about, not just about us trying to get God to do what we want God to do, but about us trying to become who God wants us to be, and literally to be filled with the Spirit so that we had the energy to do this work. And I mean, I can remember those prayers. I pray them every day still. One of them was, may every person I come in contact with feel your presence in my soul. May I leave off your fragrance everywhere I go, Jesus. Leave off the fragrance of Jesus. It's why Mother Teresa wanted the Eucharist, communion, every day. And the nun said, you've heard the saying, you are what you eat. And that's what we believe.
Even though you were a Protestant, were you taking communion while you were there?
I can neither confirm nor deny whether or not I did.
Well, let me put it this way. Did you, while you were there, I mean, let's cut to the chase here. Why aren't you a Roman Catholic now, having taken that path, and you come away, and I guess you'd still call yourself a Protestant? I mean, I'm sure you don't like any of these definitions because that they don't suit you. You're after a different type of Christianity altogether. So forgive me, because I'm not being a smartass here or trying to ask a dumb question. But at a certain point, weren't you confronted by something powerful enough that you were saying, well, this is what I want? I mean, why didn't you actually convert? Aside from monasticism and celibacy and temporary celibacy, just on the spiritual front.
Yeah, well, that quest, like, so it really began to shape me, and and I came back to Philly, and one of my best friends is Chris Haw. We wrote Jesus for President together, but we're also best buddies. And he became Catholic and wrote a book called From Willow Creek to Sacred Heart, because I met him at Willow Creek when I was a youth, as a youth intern there. And he went from mega church to becoming Catholic, and he's written a bunch of stuff since. But it's an incredible story. I considered that. In fact, I did the Christian rites for adult initiation into the Catholic Church. I was surely leaning in, and I just never felt like that was where I needed to be. I'm not Catholic, but we tried to get married in a Catholic church, and they said, are you Catholic? And I was like, oh, here's our story. And they're like, you can't use our church. So anyway,
do you think you might still do that at some point in your life? Because never say never.
Well,
you're still young. You look so young too. I mean, you've had a long life. You should look older than you are, and
that's really
all the rest of it. You look very young and well, taken care of and everything. But I just wondered if you still see that journey as open-ended, or do you think you're at where you're at this afternoon, or is this just a snapshot of today? Because for me, it tends to be a snapshot of where I'm at when I talk about faith, because it's never been very static.
Well, it's really interesting what's happening in the world, because Mark Galley, who used to be one of the head editors at Christianity Today, or the head editor, at one point he said I was wrongful. He said I converted to Catholicism, and I don't know. I just said I haven't, and I said I don't take that as an insult. I just wanted to be clear about it, and he kind of apologized and everything, and now he became Catholic. I understand. So
yeah, he was probably at the time he said it about you. It might not have been read as a compliment by him. It would have been, hey, you've joined the not maybe the other side, because Mark wasn't that sort of radically right wing, but coming from my evangelical background, as someone who'd become Catholic, like, we mark them down as we've lost them. Yeah, well, here's the deal: is there's still enough of the, half the word Protestant is protest. Yeah, right. And I still feel that fire, that there are a lot of things that
are worth protesting.
Well, and Galley, by the way, was one of the only people he came out and sort of denounced the whole Trump move by evangelicals. And then, Trump went after him kind of by name, or people, Reverend Billy Graham's son, Franklin did, or whatever. I mean, wasn't Mark in the middle of all that too? So it was more than just becoming Catholic. And he sort of take a stand on the slide of the right to the right.
Well, so I mean, I think when it comes to Catholicism, there's, I think it was Stanley Hauerwas that said, like, we should all disagree with 2 or 3 doctrines of our tradition, but not more than 3 or 4. And there's definitely some, pretty major hangups that I have. Some of them are theological, some are more social and historic, colonization, different things that are still pretty hard for me. But I think what I realized is that a lot of us were not Catholic enough to be good Protestants.
Sure.
We weren't even sure what we were protesting. It's as if we thought Christianity was, born 200 years ago with America or something,
Well, and if you look around the States and you see the number of hospitals that were founded by Catholic orders, it's not like Mother Teresa was the first person to put 2 and 2 together when it came to trying to live the gospel. There'd be, the world stripped of Roman Catholic social work would be a much more bleak place, and that too, of course. Let me change up here a minute. First of all, little housekeeping. This is In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, a podcast that is also a Facebook Live event. I'm talking with my friend Shane Claiborne today, who's author of many, many books, but Common Prayer, A Liturgy for Ordinary Radicals, Red Letter Revolutions, What If Jesus really meant what he said, with Tony Campolo, and a whole bunch of other things. And I'm Frank Schaeffer, and my most recent book is Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy, that came out a couple months ago. Tony, and we were talking about Tony Campolo and Peggy, his wife, who are, luminary people, old friends of ours. So we have a lot of connections. So I want to ask you a question here. Your shtick, and again, I'm not being facetious, but we all have a handle, has been kind of a peacemaker, social activist, but very much peacemaker in the sense that I never meet anybody who doesn't like you. You don't seem to put anybody's back up. You may have enemies, but I've never met any or heard of any out there.
I can introduce you.
Yeah, you can send me their email. But you're someone who sort of has that peacemaker ability, bring people together. I've seen you preside over small meetings and like Red Letter Christians, and you run them wonderfully, and so on. But the temper of our times is that both the right and the left, equally, no matter where you are on the spectrum, you have to admit this. I think not you personally, but one has to admit this, and that would include me. We have created a series of professional rage machines. What we do is enrage people. So the left enrages people. You think of the young congressional people, by the way, whom I helped get elected in 2018, touring the country with Vote Common Good and some mutual friends of yours and mine, like Doug Padgett and others. But, we're professional rage machines. You notice, for instance, if you go to Huffington Post, that they'll have news items which something, where they're publicizing how well somebody took someone else down. Stand-up comic really stuck it to Fox News tonight or whatever. And the right's the same. We delight in the rage we cause. So where does Shane Claiborne, looking at yourself in the third person here, fit into a world which has not passed you by exactly, but where everything has been amped up to the point where does a voice like yours get heard anywhere? And you cannot have been unaware of the fact that the evangelical community, in which you have been very popular for a progressive guy from the left, because you're such a nice person, has moved so far to the right that I just wonder how you still exist in that community. I don't mean that in an accusatory sense. It's like, in the day and age of electric cars, how are you still going to sell internal combustion engines? What they're buying out there is not what Shane Claiborne's selling anymore. I'll give you one example. Gordon College, which is down the street from me here in Massachusetts. I can remember being invited to Gordon about 15 years ago to speak, even though they knew I had left the evangelical fold. Do you understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. There still was room for rebellious, crazy, bad Frank Schaeffer because students should be exposed to this other side. You know, I'd probably be arrested if I stepped on campus now, because it went to the point where they were suing the Obama administration for the right to fire gay professors or any student that came out as gay. So even Gordon, which was sort of a more enlightened, not to be confused with Bob Jones, not to be confused with Liberty Baptist, Gordon is now a right-wing institution whose board has zeroed in on the professorship, the kind of students they want, and they are too far to the right. So where do you fit in this rightward tilted, often white nationalist and certainly Christian nationalist group of people who 70% of whom still believe that Trump is president, if you believe the polls? It just has gone off the rails. And this is since last time, say, you and I were in a room together. I'm not asking this to get something out of you. I'm just saying, where's your head at? Because this is your world. How do you, you know, who are you in this world now?
Yeah, and first of all, I don't know too much about Gordon. I think I've.
Well, I'm just using an example because I had so many friends who were teaching there, and I happened to live up the street and used to go in there quite often.
I think my professor, Duffy Robbins, is teaching there now. He's the one that was my youth ministry prof and led me to Jesus back in junior high. But yeah, anyway, here's the deal: is I'm very concerned about our country. You know, I think that there is a lot of rage. There's a lot of self-righteousness, and those things can be pretty damaging to the soul of other people and of ourselves. I'm always praying that God would make my anger holy, because I think anger can be a good thing. I sure think Jesus flipped some tables in the temple. I want to be flipping tables in the right place. I also know that Jesus wept over Jerusalem, and so I want to have the tenderness and the holy anger. I also know that the fruit of the Spirit are, the love, kindness, goodness, gentleness. That those are the things that we know God is like, and I'm always praying those that they would reside in me. Help me, Lord.
Wait, let me interrupt you a second. Cut to the chase here a second. If you were doing a new book, and like I'm an author now, and it's all on Zoom, so who knows whatever happened to the world of book tours and stuff, but that's pre-COVID-y stuff. But would you be invited to any of these places anymore? Or are you on the list? Or are you not on the list? Because now things are so, you might say, polarized that, let me put it this way. Francis Schaeffer, my dad, at the height of his ministry to evangelical Christians in the 80s, at his height of fame, doing the keynote for the Southern Baptists, whatever it may be, would no longer be invited to the institutions where he taught series in those days, simply on the basis of the fact that he would have hated Trump and said so. Well, and that would be with his pro-life stand to boot. So the irony is my dad, father of the evangelical move into the anti-abortion movement with the film series I made with him, Whatever Happened to the Human Race, amongst other people, and Dr. Koop, for that matter, would have so hated the direction Trump took it, just on a cultural basis of gut reaction to, a buffoon, not to mention the hate-filled policies and the rest, that he would have said so and now no longer be invited to give these big addresses because he would be too polarizing a figure. So if that's true of my memory of my dad, and I can tell you that unequivocally, where's that leave Shane Claiborne? Do you get invited anywhere?
Well, I'm doing a lot of Zoom events and virtual events, and I still get a lot of invitations out there. I think that there are a lot of folks that are very troubled by not just Trump, but the conditions that led to Trump, everything that Trump revealed, and I've been saying for several years, that Trump didn't change America, he revealed America.
But folks who are in the evangelical heartland or already people tending toward the progressive side. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, the same people that led me to Jesus are certainly many of the people who led us to Trump and defended Trump. And so, but, I think that what I feel is that I want people to know the love of Jesus. And one of the biggest challenges is, I think one of the biggest obstacles to Jesus is Christians who are saying all these things with our mouths, but betraying Jesus with our lives. And even I think also what's true is that there's a version of American nationalism that's trying to camouflage itself as Christianity, but it doesn't look anything like Jesus. It doesn't sound anything like Jesus. And so the antidote for the problem here is actually to center Jesus again. And there are a lot of folks, I think, that admire Jesus, but they're very troubled by the state of evangelical Christianity. But that's nothing new. You know, Frederick Douglass really named that. He said there's competing narratives here, right? And between the Christianity of Christ, which I love, and the Christianity of America, I see the widest possible difference. You know, and Douglas said, I love the Christianity of Christ. I hate the women whipping, cradle plundering, slave holding Christianity of this land. So where I've found life is outside of the most toxic versions of kind of Trump evangelicalism. And I think that's the good news, is there are things worth saying no to, and saying no to Trump evangelicalism is not the end of faith for many of us. It's the beginning of a more robust, beautiful, Jesus-centered faith. But I think the challenge is not to just get stuck in the deconstruction and the ex-evangelical, the response to the worst narrative of Christianity, and realize that the spiritual landscape, don't let white evangelicalism colonize all of Christianity. I don't want to give Jerry Falwell or Franklin Graham that much power, you know, like God is big and working outside of that. So, you know, I find life, and this is part of why I love liturgy, and I've embraced much of Catholicism, but also my life has been in the historic Black church and getting out, you know, and the folks who suffered the brunt of the you know, as Jonathan Wilson Hargrove says, the slaveholder religion, the folks who were on the, you know, side of liberation. So I think for a lot of folks that grew up in the oppressive white fundamentalism, evangelicalism, like moving into spaces with a bit better, more life-giving spirituality, and where we might even be minorities as white folks, is a really good thing. And I'll just say that I do think that, like, self-righteousness is not partisan, and there are a lot of, there's a sense that, like, when Jesus says, you know, you go across the world and you make converts, and then you make them twice the sons of hell as you. I mean, whoa, you know, like, so I think there is this calling out of the religious self-righteousness, but there's also a political and you know, social self-righteousness. And a lot of folks on the progressive side, they kind of grew their teeth in the fundamentalism and learned those same tools of policing and, you know, theological litmus tests and things like that. And, you know, so we, you know, some of the most aggressive deconstructionists were the most aggressive constructionists. And so I'm not saying that there's not a place for deconstruction, but, you know, we're rehabbing abandoned houses in Philly. Some of them need to be totally torn down because their structures are not good. Their foundations are broken. But there's other houses that they're not ready to be lived in, but they just need some cosmetic work to rip out the carpet and get rid of the bed bugs. But, you know, like, you don't need to tear the house to the ground. So I think there's some discernment.
Take a minute, coming right off that, to describe what you do day to day. We're talking about, you know, where you've been, where you're from, and your family, and author of books, and Mother Teresa. I'll describe my day. I get up at 3 a.m. in the morning. I write for 4 to 5 hours. My second cup of coffee, I go into the kitchen and do all the dishes and clean up, because my wife is happier that way. And that's why we've been married 52 years. As my friend, a friend of mine, Aaron Bagwell, told me the other day, the sexiest thing that a woman can see is a man unloading the dishwasher. And, you know, so we have a thing. So I write in the mornings, I do the dishes in the middle of that, have a second cup of coffee with Jeannie, something to eat, take the dog for a walk. Then I do stuff with Ernie, my faithful friend and producer who produced this podcast. We work together during the day. At 3 o'clock every afternoon, I pick up Nora, who's my 7.5-year-old youngest of my 5 grandchildren. I take care of her, me, not Jeannie, because Jeannie's doing other things. I'm her caregiver. And for the last 13 years, I've been doing all the child care for 3 of my 5 youngest grandchildren. And when they were little, before school, all of it. In other words, from the beginning of the workday to the end of the day, here in my house, Camp Schaeffer, out of which came my new book, Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy, which is a neurological and evolutionary investigation of why this grandfather is happier now than he's ever been in his life, having discovered that success is not what I thought it was through most of my life, even when I was doing quote unquote things I thought were good, but really it's the quality of the human relationships you have. That's my life. What is your life every day?
Oh, it's so nice.
What do you do?
My life is does not start at 3 a.m.
But I know you rehab houses and you help the poor and you rebuild things and you're involved in the Black community. You do, blow your own trumpet here for a minute.
Okay, here's the deal, Frank.
Tell us what you do every day, because it's very impressive.
I love mixing it all together, man. I write best with dirt under my fingertips. I like integrating, after I get off this Zoom call, let me tell you, I'm going to go outside to the forge and I'm going to take a bunch of our donated guns and I'm going to beat them into garden tools, which is also therapy for me.
Yeah.
But it's also, I love doing stuff with my hands, so we're making these hearts out of gun barrels and stuff. So I think that's part of my life is I'm apprenticing blacksmith. I hear my wife's alarm go off at 7 o'clock and I'm thankful that it's not mine. I snooze it as long as I can till I hear her coming back in the bus after walking the dog. And I quickly get up and act like I've been up for 15 minutes and have her breakfast ready. We eat oatmeal every morning. We eat the same thing every morning. And then I'm writing a book. I'm writing about your dad.
Are you?
Yeah. Well, I'm writing a book on a more comprehensive ethic of life.
Yeah, but seriously, writing about my dad as in this whole history of the tilt towards the right with the evangelical movement kind of thing.
Good I can't wait to get it to you. So
well, send it to me. I'd love to not only read it, but if there's anything you need, just let me know.
Yeah, so I spend a little time writing. I do these Zoom calls. I'm also doing penance now. For every hour and I'm on Zoom, I have to do push-ups and sit-ups or some exercise, which is partly for my soul.
We will have killed you today.
Yeah, I'm in a bad way here, but I'm going to just tell you the unpredictability of my day. I really do like all these different things. So we do some gardening. We do a bunch of community gardens in Philly. We started finding all these abandoned houses, which we could get for $1. So we've been flipping them, turning them into
just be clear for people who don't know who you are, because we is like, you've got some organization. This isn't just you and Katie.
Everything I do is collaborative and communal.
But through whom?
I mean, Red Letter Christians is one of the central places that we all organize, but we started all kinds of, other organizations. So our tools are raw tools, which is war flipped backwards. The housing in Philly is Simple Homes, which is just simplehomes.org. So we fix up a house, we sell all of them for $35,000, no interest, customize a monthly payment, just trying to get people housing. We're doing so I'm writing, doing some of that stuff, working a lot around the death penalty and the execution.
How much are you on the road speaking pre-COVID? How much were you out?
Half the time. So I was about 14 days a month so now I'm doing lots of virtual Zoom calls and stuff. But just to tell you my day yesterday. So then I got a call right after, it was about 4 o'clock and my nephews and nieces my nephews were saying, we're going snowboarding in Boone and it's a dude's night for $10 or something. So I'm sore today, Frank, because I was snowboarding and I've still got it, man. I got my snowboard on last night. So anyway, but that's a different kind of, Katie and I both do circus stuff. So we juggle and fire breathe and unicycle and do stilts. So I like that.
Are you still making your own pants? Still making your own pants?
Yes.
What are you wearing now?
Because of my snowboarding.
How floppy are they?
They're very floppy, and I have them because
every time you showed up, it always looked to me like you were in a kilt. I mean, they were like a long kilt. You couldn't tell they were like a big long pant skirt.
Well, maybe I was ahead of my time with those Jinko wide jeans, but I really like the baggies. So I'm still making clothes from time to time.
If you want me to do something on this book where you're talking about my dad, I'm going to trade you whatever I do for one of those trowels, because I do a lot of gardening.
Yes. Well, which one, so
I want a gun barrel chart.
We've got this kind, which is
that's what I want.
Okay.
No, that's right. That's it. I need that.
Or the shovel. Okay. Now
I need that thing.
Guess what I'm learning right now? I literally have a wood lathe that I'm learning, because this is made out of the gun too, the wood stock. So I'm learning to spin these handles.
I need one of those.
Yeah, I got you, man. I got you.
Yeah, I'll take care of you on the book and do all that, and I'll blurb it for free. You don't have to send me anything. Brian McLaren taught me that you help your friends when they need you, but we don't have to pay a bribe Brian with stuff. But we're going to wrap this up in a minute. So that's your day. How do you see your future in terms of this kind of crazy thing happening in the country? You're talking about my dad. If you had checked in with me in the early 1980, and I sort of bailed from the whole evangelical right-wing scene in around 1990, totally out, but was on my way toward that, I would have never pictured where we're at today. In other words, I would have said my memoir books like Crazy for God, okay, that's past history. They're interesting to people who want to know where this all came from or who like my writing. But, by the time, a few years from now, Hillary Clinton will be president. It's going to all go in that direction. And all of a sudden, we have a Supreme Court that seems to be on the side of not just the right, but with Amy Coney Barrett's ruling, for instance, that churches are exempt from national health policy because otherwise it's religious persecution. It's starting to look really like theocracy kind of stuff. So it's so far out of what anything would have been that I predicted. I've completely lost faith in my own ability to predict anything. In other words, I look at the future just with my mouth open, and I'm not terribly worried. I'm an optimist. I think human beings are cooperators, and that if we realign our idea of what success is to human relationships rather than the getting and keeping of stuff, we'll be okay. I'm not a pessimist, but I'm just sort of gobstruck by the present moment. Do you have any clarity at all on where we are or where we may be going? I mean, forget we're public. I mean, we're just serious. I'm being serious, Shane. What do you think?
Well, we are definitely in a bad way. And this study that I think I mentioned it, but this more in common study, right? That what it showed is that 80% of Republicans think Democrats are brainwashed and evil. 80% of Democrats think Republicans are brainwashed and evil. But what was really eerie about this is that it went on to say an overwhelming number of both, the left and the right, thinks the world would be better off without the other, even here. Mm-hmm. And of course, in a country that has more guns than people, that's so heavily armed, I think we're really in a dangerous season. But it's also true that, you see the brightest stars in the darkest nights. And I think it's an incredible time to try to be that leaven and that love and that light. As far as, I'm very excited by the people that are waking up around a lot of the issues that some of us have been singing that song for a while. The death penalty, every year a new state's abolishing it. The Supreme Court we used to look to as a place that might rule not on cruelty, unfortunately, but on unusual, that fewer and fewer places are having. I don't think we can look to the Supreme Court now. So we're going to Joe Biden and we're saying demolish the death house, just tear it down, the federal death chamber. We're going to Congress and saying pass a federal abolition death penalty bill, incentivize states to move against it. But Virginia became the first formerly Confederate state to abolish last year. Gun violence. I mean, there's a whole youth movement around it, racial justice, the Black Lives Matter movement. So I'm encouraged. The young people, they're on fire. And this is the thing. People are always talking about young people leaving the church. Yeah, they're leaving the church. They're leaving the church not because we've made the gospel too hard, but because we made it too easy. We handed them a doctrinal statement and they wanted a revolution. Like, young people want to see the world be different. And that's what Jesus was proclaiming. I'm excited about life after death. I still believe in heaven and hell. I also believe in life before death. I believe like Jesus didn't just come to prepare us to die. And I think that's the kind of gospel that people are hungry for. It's the kind of people that we need to be embracing and build a movement with. So, I'm proud we got arrested a few weeks ago, on Dr. Martin Luther King Day. And I plan on going to jail. There's a lot of things worth going to jail over. And as John Lewis said, that's the good trouble. That's the stuff you can smile in your mugshot. because you're on the right side of history, So I think we need some to keep turning up the volume for love and for grace. And there's some crazy stuff out there. I mean, I went to one of these maskless churches just as an experiment. I don't know if you saw that in Tennessee. Like, they didn't allow masks in the middle of the worst of the pandemic.
Yeah, I saw that.
But they had guns there, and I'm like, there's something wrong with a theology that says I don't need a mask because God's going to protect me, but I need a Glock, So I think we need to challenge that theology, and we need to center Jesus. We need to lean into the parts of the church that know liberation and know that the good news is good news to the poor. And if it's not good news to the poor, it's not the gospel of Jesus. So I am, excited to be alive. I think what an amazing time it is to try to, stand up for love in the midst of all that hatred.
Yeah, well, thank you, Shane. And just to wrap it up, this is Frank Schaeffer. This is In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. Shane Claiborne is a friend and a guest, someone I admire a great deal. So enjoyed talking with you now, Shane. And I mentioned before, the book that I'm talking about a lot now is Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy. And I just want to say that the thesis of that book, you just encapsulated, because what it's about is this, and that is that as long as our idea of success is the domination, manipulation, and profiting off others, we are not going to have happiness, or joy. But if we recalibrate our idea of success here in this country, whatever our politics, whatever our religious beliefs, to putting the quality of our caring relationships with others first, because we're all caregivers, then we will be moving in the right direction. And I think the young people you're talking about are hungry for that. The number of them that wanted to work from home, for instance, after they got a taste of it in COVID, and they realized it was strengthening relationships with children and family. And now you have the great resignation as people say, listen, we're not going back to that same stuff. And they're doing it by millions. So I'm with you. I'm an optimist, because I think, if you look at the study of evolution and evolutionary psychology, one of the things I discovered in writing this book that I didn't know, because as an evangelical, who studies evolution, but this was a 6-year project, a lot of study and reading. One of the big kickers for me is it used to all be the survival of the fittest. And of course, all kinds of people use that to justify anything. But really all the science in the last 25, 30 years has been in a totally different direction. And that is the human race is only here because it actually was about the survival of the friendliest. And we are here as a human race because of the quality of our ability to cooperate with others. So when I look at you, I just want to say this from my point of view and what I've been reading and studying about, and what is in my new book, is that you are actually on the cutting edge of where the next generation will be going, which is in the direction of cooperation rather than power over others. And I really think we're on the cusp of that. So I hope you hang around for a while and live a long time, because you can help lead that movement. And with that said, Shane, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, my brother. Great to be with you.
Yeah, lovely to be with you again. And in the flesh, hopefully not too far from now.
I hope so, man. Yeah.
That
was fun. Thanks for having me. Yeah, keep in touch, buddy. I'll get you this book. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to see it.
It's a little ways off, but I'll
yeah, but I mean, come the day when you feel like somebody, fresh eyes, cool. I'll look forward to it.
Thank you, man.
Thanks, Shane. Much love. Bye-bye.
Bye, Ernie. See you, man.